Hey folks, welcome to the second episode of For Instance podcast. I'm here with Sarah Musick. Hey Sarah,
Hey Sarbjeet.
how was the week?
It was good. We're on our way.
All right. So in today's episode, we're going to cover a bunch of earnings, some news, and a couple of ideas which will pertain to the news we'll talk about. There will be very contextual topics to current things we'll talk about from last 2 weeks. With that said, Sarah, what's the biggest news from your side, from earning side? Let's cover earnings first.
Okay, earnings first. So, there's a lot that came out with Equinix and Qualcomm and Amazon and Intel and AMD. So there was quite a bit from the earnings side of things. So from the silicon side of things, we talked a little bit about TSMC last week and, kind of the fab challenges they're having in Chandler. Sort of interesting story to follow, especially with some of the supply chain stuff that's been going on. So Intel and AMD both released their earnings in the past 2 weeks, and some interesting stuff to follow. Intel, coming into the beginning of the year and coming into this quarter, was kind of hurting. And there were some signs of life, especially from CEO Pat Gelsinger and CFO Dave Zinsner. But some interesting action. So, from a cash flow perspective, they had over $3 billion in free cash flow. So they're starting to do a good job of managing the cash situation. One quarter doesn't make a trend. So we have to bear that in mind, but some signs of life. Client is down 12%, but that's not as much as it's been in previous quarters, especially given some of the headwinds. Data center down 15%. Intel Foundry Services, on the other hand, and they announced a couple big partnerships, is up 307%. So from a foundry perspective, Intel seems to be sort of sharpening their pencils. And they mentioned the 5 nodes in 4 years track that they're on is gaining steam, in that there's a lot of interest for their 18A tech. So a lot that's promising there, especially because they're saying that their gross margin is going to go up a fair bit going into Q3. So I think that will be a bellwether that everybody will want to watch. AMD came out with, I would say a pretty solid quarter. Their embeddeds look the best, with which is up 16% year over year. So, things like automotive, in particular, their partnership with Tesla, gross margin at 46%, pretty solid. Uh, the big surprise here was their client numbers, which is down 54% year on year. So, Intel being down about 12%, AMD being down 54%. One analyst I read said, maybe they're doing this on purpose. Are they, potentially making an intentional pivot away from client? I don't think that's the case. But I think given some of the energy around wanting to catch the AI wave, the client piece may not seem as immediate to them, but that was something that I think caused their stock price, for the next few days after that, not to perform quite as well as it might have otherwise. But, uh, you know, I think we're watching an active jockeying that's entertaining. It should be continue to be really interesting for folks. What do you think?
True. Yeah, actually, Intel's pivot is in progress, so that's how I see it. Um, Pat is a great leader. I know him from VMware side a lot
That's
more
right.
than prior to that. He was at Intel earlier as well. He's very active, charismatic leader. I hope he will pull it off. And also, I think Intel is US's main or only hope to have foundry business in US. US wants to do to be self-reliant, right? In chips,
Agreed.
especially the cutting edge chips, and Intel getting into foundry business. I think that's great. It works to their advantage. And also, I mean, of course, there's CHIPS Act, and they will benefit from that, and some foreign companies will benefit from that as well,
Mhm.
as soon as they put the plants here.
for sure.
but I think they will benefit less than Intel. Um, it's it's a long game. It's a long game. It's a long pivot, and I think
Agreed.
investors and mainly investors here have to be patient with Intel, and some are betting on
Some
the
are.
revival of it.
Yeah. And I think from a public perception perspective, AMD has the edge. More recently, they've performed in, Wall Street like stocks with a long tail. And by that, I mean, if you're in the challenger position and the market share that you have is a minority share and you're eating into somebody else's share, they reward that uh, for extended periods of time. And so it's really at this point, I think, up to Intel to kind of start pushing back. And so I think Q3 in that sense is going to be really key for both companies. I think the embedded will be intriguing to watch for AMD because, to be up 16% in this climate for that business is really intriguing for sure.
Definitely in the earning context, you're spot on. But I'm talking about the overall at macro level in greater sort of timeline wise. AMD doesn't have fab, and Nvidia doesn't have fab of their own.
Right.
I usually say the fabless country cannot be fabulous country. So
So yeah,
it's,
interesting
yeah,
there.
interesting stuff on Intel.
Do you want to
Moving
pivot
on
to,
to
you had some thoughts on Qualcomm and Equinix. Do you want to
yeah. No,
some
actually,
of the other ones?
very high level. Qualcomm did bad as well. I mean, the quarter was as expected, but market punished them pretty big time. The stock was down 8-9% next day, which their PE is around 12 or so. It's very cheap stock right now, but the story is not sticking actually. The numbers were down as we expected. Client computing is down.
Hmm.
They make chips for cell phones a lot and for auto as well. Um, so that was Qualcomm.
Both tough.
I will do more sort of little deeper analysis in my weekly. If I start covering here, it will be a long segment here. So
Okay,
we'll touch.
fair enough.
We'll touch upon like a high level. Equinix did good actually. Their stock was up after hours and next day as well. Um, the need for colo, as we know, that people are tightening their belt, and there's a lot big there's a lot of there's a lot more push from incumbent vendors to sort of hop onto that narrative that cloud is expensive and let's do stuff close to where you are. Let's come back to data center. So I think they reaped some benefit of that, but it was not as great as I personally thought it will be. So that means that repatriation is still very um, sort of remote possibility, or it's not as big as some are making it. And on that note,
Yeah.
I exchanged quite a few tweets about repatriation with Dave Vellante, Crawford from IDC, and many others who were in these threads. And I'm a big cloud proponent, very openly I say that that's a modern way of consuming compute, and it's industrialization of computing, I call it, right? So why will you go back, right? So,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
we will be hybrid for a long time. I never like
Oh, indefinitely, for sure. Yeah, one stat, and I think this may have been a Gartner stat. I'd have to go back and look that I read a few months ago. Fully 50% of organizations are looking at repatriation. That's a massive number. But the catch is only 10% of workloads actually get repatriated that have already been taken to the cloud. So what that means is that there is an active rebalancing going on, and most organizations are at least thinking about it on some level. But the number of workloads that actually go back, and I think there are a variety of reasons. Agility, they get used to the agility in the cloud, their developers become used to the cloud, the level of effort to get it back on prem. There are a lot of reasons that end up keeping them in the cloud for one reason or another. So I think that's an interesting distinction to draw because the hybrid isn't going away. most people will look at repatriating, but the number of workloads being repatriated for the time being at least seems to be relatively low.
Yeah, I have problem with all these numbers. I, I, and I say that, like, okay, when you say, when anybody says we'll be hybrid for a long time or forever, hybrid is a relative term, right? You can be 10% on-prem and 90% cloud, or vice versa, right? It's like, no, we have to be more precise about, like, we will be like 60-40 or 70-30. Like, we have to do better analysis than just saying we'll be hybrid for a long time. I think that's one thing. And also, when people say that what percentage of workload is moving, and then you have to look at if they're just looking at the application number of applications, right? Okay, from 100 applications, let's say they say 50 moved, but if those 50 are like small applications, or they are running on Windows XP or some old stuff, right? We know that some applications are very old, developers have gone home,
Legacy,
and
yeah,
yeah,
not cloud
so
native.
not mission critical, and they don't take much bandwidth anyways. So it matters what those applications are. I think the number we should look at is mainly spend, right? How much spend is being done in cloud versus on-prem. I think that is the right measure, according to me. And if your application is not cloud native, right, of course it will be more expensive there. By the way, why will you take a non-cloud native application to cloud? Because you want to build something next to it, which is based upon that application, where the latency is very important to you, and because data, you need access to that data from that application. Most probably it's a system of record. You need that to cook up your system of engagement or system of innovation, right? So that's why people take these applications to the cloud. I mean, they're not dumb. Seriously, they are not dumb when they move these applications. By the way, 37 signals like started this debate this time. 37 signals brought this 15, 20 years old application back, which they never touched. It's the same old application which they had. I mean, first of all, why did they move it to the cloud? I think for the same reasons what I was talking about. Maybe they wanted to build more functionality next to it, you know. But they another another ironic point I make is it's very valid point, is like the fact that they were able to bring back that application with that much ease on-prem means they were not leveraging cloud. If
That's
they were
right.
leveraging cloud, it will be a lot of work to untangle that from cloud. They were not cloud native. So yeah, bring it back. It's okay, just take a pic. They took a picture with all these Dell servers, and it's a big deal, right? So
Yeah, yeah, and I hear what you're saying about spend being a better bellwether than, uh, how do we define hybrid? The notion of defining hybrid, I think, is fairly tidy at this point from the standpoint of at least one hyperscaler and then a solid data center footprint. But I would say that looking at the spend is bedeviled by some of the same challenges as looking at the percentage of the workloads. And reason being, not every workload is going to cost the same amount of money. And organizations don't tend to think about it that way. They'll budget for it that way. But in terms of the way they think about cloud footprint, if, from a spend perspective, you have an oversized spend in a particular hyperscaler, but that it's because there's a mission critical application that has to be agile that's there. But they think of themselves, mainly as a data center shop, as a private cloud shop. I, you know, I think all those lines get blurred fairly quickly. I had an insurance provider tell me, if we move this particular application, there is literally no amount of money that we could spend that would be too much to keep
mhm.
this application resilient. Just because, if something happened, they're
Business is down.
yeah, they had to their customers had to be able to file claims. If that went down, then, you know, from a PR perspective, that would be a disaster. But they thought of themselves really, I'd say, more as a hybrid with a weighting toward the data center kind of organization. But it's fascinating, the psychology of what constitutes a true hybrid.
Yeah, true. And another aspect is that innovation in the pace of innovation happening in cloud versus on-prem technologies, right? I personally believe that this pace of innovation happening in cloud is much faster because it's concentrated and it's
Yeah.
it's localized to these three, four vendors, and this put a lot of money into the security side of things and scale their own specialized chips. On the other side, there are three providers on the cloud public cloud side, mainly three public cloud providers, right? But there's a long tail there. But on the on-prem technology side, there are so many vendors, like a lot more, and it's it's a subcategory almost. There are good vendors, definitely. The NetApps of the world and the Dells of the world, they're good vendors. HPE, and there are some pure software vendors like VMware and Red Hat. IBM is there. Uh, I spent a day with IBM storage folks here at the Cube Studio. They're doing innovation in those areas. But again, you bring in those heterogeneous technologies into your data center, and now you're trying to train people on technologies which are from, let's say, 5 or 7 plus vendors, right? Just in infrastructure as a service world, right? Forget about applications and or even platforms. It becomes a little complex situation to manage. I think vendor management and vendor simplification is one of the top priority of CIOs um, all over the world.
Yeah. The issue of, skilling their people, because I think the extent to which innovation happens in the data center is driven to some extent by how homogenized
Yeah.
the data center footprint is. So if they've standardized, a lot of organizations now are cloudifying their data centers where they essentially have a cloud that they've built internally. And so you can consume things as a service. And so it's doing away with some of the challenges of, oh, you have this person over here who wants this really odd configuration. Well, guess what? Our cloud doesn't offer it now. And so it does make the organization more nimble. But at the end of the day, it takes a ton of effort to get there. And so I think, kind of bringing it back to some of our earlier central points, the public cloud, it's the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's that classic build versus buy that we've seen in tech forever on different levels. I think if you have somebody who's already built the cloud for you, you can just walk in. There's a cost attached to that because they've built it for you, but at least you don't have to invest the energy to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and within cloud, there are variations between AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, right? So one is like a Lego shop, one is a toy shop, The two are toy shops and one is a Lego shop. Like you get the Legos and make your own toys, right? That's Amazon, right? So there are all differences, and yeah, it, it's a fascinating world. I mean, to be honest with you, I think people will consume these technologies based on their needs and their leadership styles and their cultures of their companies and the risk taking ability, like ability to take risk. Like at Rackspace, I was my team was in charge of the pitch deck. We were advisory services, and we were taking care of the top 10 customers, right? And our partners, and it was good stuff. So the one slide we have, John and Gates, our CTO, was a good friend of mine, and we were cooking up these slides jointly, right? One slide was that a unit of cloud is more expensive than a unit of on-prem, same unit of on-prem, compute. We had that, even though we were selling cloud. We told people it is, but we also told them why and when cloud will become cheaper. With time and with the right architecture, it will become cheaper. It's not cheaper to start with. No, definitely not. If you go to
Mhm.
cloud to save money, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Seriously, in the beginning, if you say that you will save money by going to cloud, you do not know what you're doing. So that's what I usually say. But in
Agreed.
the long term, that is true because you will cook up stuff fast. You will innovate, outpace your competitors in innovation. That way, you will do more business, um, cheaper, faster, and they will be left behind. It's like Kodak versus, uh, who's making best cameras these days? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Canon.
that's a good question. That's a disruptive, you know, conversation there, in itself, given that Kodak actually developed the technology that today drives digital photography, and then they sat on it, and here
Yeah.
we are.
They missed it.
So,
They
yeah,
invented the digital camera, but they couldn't leverage that. Sometimes
yeah.
that happens.
As
Um,
an interesting pivot, you mentioned Rackspace. There is a news story that I was going to mention at some point, but it was released this morning. I think certainly on Yahoo News that uh, Rackspace is going to build a full stack solution for generative AI model building with Dell. And it's going to be a fully hosted solution, and so essentially they'll give you the building blocks. I thought that was uh, kind of
Interesting.
interesting, and maybe some of the approaches to generative AI, you know, maybe that's something that we could use as a pivot moving into
Yeah.
our next topic.
I had dinner with Rackspace, new Rackspace CEO, like about a couple of months back here in Palo Alto. They do want to, I mean, shouldn't say desperately, they do want to revive the company, right? It was one of the best. We open sourced OpenStack, and company got like recognition in the B2B world. They were hosting company as just like kind of GoDaddy-ish company, right? But then they became like this enterprise company, and we acquired few companies during that time. Our stock was improving big time. We were number two cloud for some time. After Amazon, we were considered number two.
It's wild.
Um, but then, you know, Azure was not there at all, zero, no presence of Azure at that point. And Google had their Google App Engine, which was purely lock in, and any serious developer will not like that, writing to somebody's API and getting locked all the way in. But they rectified that after a few years. But anyways, long story short, they have chops and Rackspace and Dell have traditionally from the past, they have worked very closely. I know Rob Hirschfeld used to work with us from Dell. He was building Crowbar for automation deployment of infrastructure based upon OpenStack and deep in trenches, writing code and all that stuff. Good crowd there because the proximity is there as well, San Antonio to Austin,
Right.
and there's a big Austin office from Rackspace side. So a lot of engineers sort of go back and forth. I think they can do something together, and they should. I want Rackspace to succeed mainly because I have a lot of friends working there. We call them Rackers.
The
Yeah,
Rackers.
it was great
Yeah.
tenure there. Awesome people, Texans. They're like
Texans.
Punjabi. I'm from Punjab, India. Farmers, right? They. I felt like I was in Punjab. Like they were. So let's go home, and they treat you like you're part of the family, and it was
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah, I miss those days. Okay, coming back to earnings. Which we are we may run out of time. Amazon, we can't ignore that. Amazon reported earnings, and it was better than expected. 12% growth in cloud, um, and the stock popped, and happy days are back. We thought they will fall to single digit in cloud, right? But they did 12%, and things are improving. Things are stabilizing, um, as Andy said. And by the way, Andy's remarks in the conference call were ditto copy of what he discussed with John Ford of CNBC on his interview. Actually, John Ford did an interview with Andy Jassy about 3 to 4 weeks before the earnings, but it was just same things what he said. in that call, that how they're approaching it, and they're taking their time to serve the AI market. They're not rushing in. They think it's the other people. We know who the other people are. They have like a lot more fluff, or it's very like a shiny object, but practicality of these models has to come from the proprietary data these businesses have.
Right.
Right. So I will let you take this into AI discussion, and we can compare and contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. For one thing that I think is interesting as we continue and look at the jockeying of the big three CSPs is that I do think generative AI will have a meaningful bearing on their footprints. I think they recognize that. They wouldn't put the kind of energy and money that they're, $100 million from Amazon in terms of a public commitment, what they're planning on pouring into generative AI, pretty staggering. I think it was it Adam Slipsky who said, the AWS CEO, that, when you think about a race, they are 3 steps into this generative AI race. And so there's this prevailing sense. I almost felt like Amazon's admitting it a little bit, that Microsoft and Google, to your point, were a little faster out of the gate with some solutions from a generative AI perspective, but they're playing the long game. Because does anybody remember the first 3 steps of a 10K race once you get to the 9K mark? And the answer is no, not really. I think that's an interesting analogy. On the other hand, first out of the gate, in a horse race and things like that, a lot of people from a superstitious perspective view that as meaningful. So I don't, you know, think it's nothing. But I hear what they're saying too, that this is a long game, and there will be a rebalancing of the market eventually, and I think that will give us what we're dealing with moving forward. So from a generative AI perspective, what Amazon's doing. So of course, Bedrock, which we mentioned last time, is a serverless solution that they're continuing to expand on. So they'll, they're bringing in some new models that they'll be able to support. One thing that I thought was really interesting from a monitoring perspective is the issue of agents. So they did mention that potentially your applications built on Bedrock with generative AI could be agented, so you could watch behavior. Historically, from an enterprise perspective, there's sort of an allergic reaction to agents, but I can also see a case in which that would be useful. So QuickSight, they mentioned some stuff from a QuickSight perspective. So, embedded analytics, and they had a couple other things. My overall takeaway, aside from some of the extra compute from an EC2 perspective that they're going to release for improved graphics performance with NVIDIA, is that my gut suspicion is that they're going to verticalize. And we were talking about this before we started recording, but they just came out with Health Scribe, and I wonder, and this is pure speculation, if they're going to start trying to come out with model foundations for industry. So like financials, FSI would be another, manufacturing, that would be another. Is that going to be their unique sauce or play? Super, super early to say, but there has to be quite a bit of thought that's going into this. And while they mentioned those, 7 big points in New York, and I think they're significant, it seems like they're holding the reins pretty closely right now. What do you think?
Yeah. I made the notes on the New York summit announcements from Swami. This was the first time Amazon came out and spoke very like openly about how they want to approach generative AI. They were like most of the time they kept like mum. They didn't say anything. They'll just don't say anything, right?
Sort of eerie.
So
Yeah.
like people were like getting like, why they are not saying anything, right? So yeah, these they announced Bedrock actually a couple of months back, but after that they said nothing. But Swami's announcements were again they still seem timid against what Microsoft and Google are doing, because they have thrown heavy punches, if you will. So Swami announced 7 things, right? As you covered some of those. Uh, I don't want to mislabel those. So I'm going to look at my notes here to my left side here. The one is the Bedrock will bring in new models from Anthropic, Stability AI, and Cohere. Cohere will bring 2 flagship models. One is called Command. It's a text generation model, and the other one is called Cohere Embed. It's for multilingual text understanding model. Actually, that's a command model. So Anthropic will bring the cloud CLAUDE 2 cloud 2 model, and Stability AI will bring their Stable Diffusion SDXL 1.0. And agents for Amazon Bedrock, I think that makes perfect sense. This is not the agent what we are afraid of from the past. Like every machine has an agent running on it, or we don't know what it's collecting and all that stuff. This agent is sitting next to data, right? And then it is training these large language models. It's actually creating a layer on top of the knowledge which is already in the large language models. On top of that is layering that. So it is creating kind of specialized models. During my discussion with John Ferrier and Dave Vellante, during SuperCloud 3 discussions, we talked about AI a lot, and I believe that we will have industry models. There will be some will be vertical, just for insurance industry. How do you detect fraud in insurance industry? I mean, it's a very unique problem. So I used to work at Visa. So how do you stop fraud in credit card industry? That's the unique problem. But there are some horizontal problems as well. So there'll be horizontal models like security model, like how you stop DDoS attack. Like everybody needs it. So we will have those, and we'll have vertical sort of models as well. So we'll have it will be more like during the discussion, actually, at some point I said, let's think of models as an employee or a very smart employee, right? So they're trained in a certain thing. They have studied something for too long, like some people are very generic, some degrees are very generic when we study, and some degrees are very like scientific in nature, and another thing is about the whole AI thing is that another thing I said was that we will not take the generative AI anywhere near our systems of record, because systems of record are very close to what regulators look at, and there are numbers involved, and these generative AI solutions are so bad with math. It
That's
is
not, yeah, that's not somewhere where you wanna get creative with the data. That's not somewhere
yes.
we wanna get creative. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I hear what you're
You don't want
saying.
to get creative with how much tax you paid, or how much money you make, and how much you're reporting to the market. So yeah, you want to keep it away from system of record for some time, at least for maybe long time. But for systems of innovation and systems of engagement,
Yeah.
you want to apply these things. And the third thing was the vector engine. Yeah, vector engine support. Everybody has a vector database, and that's how actually we are taming AI, right? So alignment of AI happens through the vector databases. And what we do is we store all these things, what we want AI not to do, because AI, if you will, generative AI knows a lot more than what we want it to tell us what it knows. Yep. Other things are, I think, small, generative business intelligence, generative BI, they call it, right? And oh, by the way, number 5 announcement was I think that's a SaaS offering, which they need to get into, I believe. So that was Health Scribe. They may label it PaaS, because API based stuff, but it's vertical, as you said. they're getting into vertical healthcare scribe. It's for, I think I'm losing this term again. Um, the health tech companies can use it, as well as the end users like hospitals and bigger
Yeah.
care
It
providers can
looks
use it.
like clinicians is in particular who they're targeting. That'll help as they're brainstorming about what exactly did the patient tell me, what did they describe, and will help start spinning out that story. And then that's something potentially that you could save as a record in the EHR system, which is interesting. Um,
Yeah, it is
so
actually. And we all have doctors. We all go to doctors and we go there. I have two doctors in my family, right? And they are freaking crying almost every time, like I see them, and they are late to the parties. You know why? Because one of them is very late all the time. Because he does, my brother-in-law, so he does charts at home. They call charts, right? So he handwrites the notes. He studied in India, so in India they don't teach us typing. Uh, and and his wife complains about it, like, why can't you do it over there? He said, I'm
oh,
listening to the patient. He's a good doctor, actually.
I'm
um,
sure.
so the doctors actually do 70-80% of the time they are just bogged down with the technology, and but 20 to 30% of the time they're really actually listening to the patient, which is, it should be the other way around. So this, hopefully this fixes it. And the number six announcement was, I think this improves the compute optics, I call it. I try to come up with these catchy phrases. This improves AWS's compute optics. They said they will bring in NVIDIA H100 GPUs into few instances. Like, they were very particular about highlighting their own chips, right? Inferentia and Graviton, because they think it's cheaper inference and training by using Amazon's native chips. But this time, I think they did the right thing. The NVIDIA and AI, generative AI, they when you talk about generative AI, you think about NVIDIA, right? So I think it will help them get some sort of it will give people some peace of mind that, hey, if I go to AWS, I can get to NVIDIA H100s, right? So
Yeah, the P4 uh was due for an upgrade anyway, and so the discussion of the P5 is interesting in part because I think they're very smartly being uh opportunistic about it in thinking about large language models. So I think it makes a ton of sense. Capacity will be interesting because even the cloud providers, some folks say, in the cloud, oh, we don't have to worry about capacity constraints anymore because it's the cloud. Well, guess what? They have to deal with it too. And so, you know, cus- I've seen customers of the CSP struggle in their region to get access to the compute that they need for whatever reason, just because they deal with the same constraints that everybody else does. They have a lot of power to wield, and so typically they'll be some of the first to get that resolved. But uh,
yeah,
the H100 shortages, it'll be interesting to see how that comes to bear here. It may not, just because Amazon's sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
actually, having worked with two cloud providers, I can attest that, because we never disclosed what capacity we run at. Like, in your data centers, people know that we're running at 80% capacity or 70, in certain areas. So, like, no cloud provider will tell you they are running at 80% or 70. They just keep that secret, right,
Yeah,
to
but their
themselves.
account teams have to disclose if they can't get something for a customer. So that's when they find out is, oh, you want, whatever instance in Central 2. Sometimes it's those,
Yeah, then you find out.
secondary, and then you find out, which can be tough.
Yeah, definitely. Then you find out. But another aspect of cloud, a lot of people maybe don't dig deeper enough into is that the proximity of workloads, right? So
Yeah.
if you're trying to get the workloads very close to the racks you are already in, because you are running fiber between those, and the latency matters by even milliseconds, right? To you, then it becomes a problem. And what cloud providers do is for those kind of customers, like if you're Goldman Sachs, like you know that you have n number of racks empty next to your freaking big footprint in all regions, so you can expand there. Bigger the hammer, more you bend, and bigger the hammer, more extra capacity they will get there. That's how it works. Another actually, that's a great point. A capacity point is a great point. And the last point, the number 7 announcement was that AWS is offering new free and low cost. I kind of hated that term, free and low cost. When I go, how much is free and how much is low cost? And what does low cost mean? So, anyways, they are providing that training to on generative AI to folks. And I usually say, I usually talk about a term I have put out there, skills gravity. Just like data has gravity, skills have gravity as well. So if you can train practitioners on your technology, if you can train more practitioners easily, if they can get hands onto your technology faster, cheaper, anywhere, right? Which cloud actually allows you to do that, then your technology will be used
It's
in
the
the future.
incumbent.
Yeah,
Yep. That's
that's how
an
it goes.
awfully difficult seat to unset once it's embedded in the organization, for sure.
Yeah.
So
Another catchy phrase, once I take a topic, I just think about it like to the nth degree. And it's like, and then I came up with this one liner. It's like, to outcompete your competition, you have to out educate the market. Seriously, if you think deeply about it, you have to out educate the market to outcompete your competitors. There's no ifs or buts about it.
I
So
like it. Yeah. Which is why Google is throwing so much energy into the certifications that they're pretty much flooding the market with, because they
certified.
want to capture some of that. I think that's really fair. I've got another one liner for you, or maybe a catchphrase, given what we were describing, that maybe there's going to be this verticalization of models, and then the horizontal, based on the business case or the use case. It's sort of a plaid approach to generative AI, because we have the vertical,
Yeah,
orientation, and then of course the horizontal orientation. So I'm going to call it a plaid approach to generative AI.
that makes sense. Yeah, it's like both ways, right?
Right.
Vertical and horizontal. Yeah,
So
actually, these things actually may sound cheesy, but they help us make a point with fewer words, and people get it. Sometimes, many times, analogies work. Like we create a parallel from what we are very familiar with, and say, hey, yeah, that makes sense. Like there's no fabric without having vertical and horizontal lines.
for sure.
Right. So that was AWS or Amazon, like mainly. Oh, that's huge.
Yeah.
I have quite a few things. I will really breeze through a couple of things here. Um, One of my key areas which I think about all the time is I'm economics major. Most of people know that out there who know me. And I fell into technology in '94 and just did technology. But in deep down, I have that sort of you know
Still
thing
an
going on,
economist's heart.
timer
Yep.
going on here.
Yeah.
Like you got to pay attention to this too. Hank Paulson and Timothy Geithner, they appeared on Fareed Zakaria's show, and they touched upon the chips ban on China. And actually, deep down, I think it's a wrong thing to do. I think we are using national security card to just twist the arm of China to get better deal out of them for on trade front. And I think that's a wrong approach. It's a very cheesy approach, and this goes against the fundamentals, what U.S. stands for, free markets.
Hmm.
And protectionism never actually is good for your country's industry. It never works. So that's one of my sort of gripes with the policy right now. Another thing was Fitch downgraded U.S.
Yes.
And actually just now 10 banks were downgraded by Moody's, and they have put some other banks on alert today. We're recording it on Tuesday, guys, you can tell now. So that's interesting. It's a warning for us to get its house in order, if you will. We're spending too much
Mhm.
money, making less money as a nation, if you will, and we're under debt, so credit card debt.
The last time that happened was 2011, and we were coming out of the recession, and things were looking positive, but the market swooned right around that time period, and so, I think some of the concerns about, the dreaded R word recession have been allayed to some extent, but I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I think everybody recognizes that. So it'll be interesting to see because I don't think it's going to be a straight path in any direction, down or up.
Yeah.
I think we're in for some real volatility.
Yeah, I personally, I think if it doesn't stay this way or doesn't get better quick, then it will get really worse. I mean, like, knowing what I know about the psychology of the markets and economics and the rates, keep if we have to keep the rates high for long, we have to pay our debt, right? So
Mhm.
government has also, they have the same rates. Like, they are not getting money at 1%, and then we are getting it 7 or 5% bank to bank rate, right? So yeah, it will come back, bite us, and yeah, it's
And from a technology perspective, we can't ignore that either. We have a risk of being a little dour. A lot of these companies who are starting generative AI initiatives, the how expensive capital is to get your hands on is going to have a bearing on how quickly companies can innovate. Because if you're going to finance some of it, that's, and it's expensive to do right now, or at least comparatively speaking, where we came from, I think that's going to be a bigger factor than just the innovate, innovate, innovate drive that a lot
yeah.
of people seem to feel that frenetic
I mean,
push.
to be honest with you, that's why the cloud demand has gone down, because cloud demand was mainly the core demand from public cloud was mainly for experimentation,
Mhm.
number one, and then the systems of engagement, and then the system of record, the last thing which moved there, right? Or which you should move there. So it shows, and keeping that in mind, if that happens, if the money is expensive for a long time, then only few companies can afford
That's
to
right.
spend money. So concentration happens, and I have said this many times, that every economic jolt leaves the rich richer and poor poorer, because during tough times, only people who can borrow more or spend more are the ones who are rich, who already have a good credit, right? So the credit of the normal poor people, right, it goes worse, right?
Yeah.
So they can't get any more money, because in bad times, everybody knows that you should buy property in bad times, but I can't because my credit is bad, I don't have income. But if you have money in the bank, then of course you will buy it, so you will become richer, who's already rich, and poor will become poorer. So I think policymakers need to pay attention to that, and there should be some deferred policy for people who have more money. They get different rate than people who have less money, but that's maybe socialism talk, I guess. um all
Subject for
right.
another day. We both have an interest in that
By the way,
direction.
I'm not
So
socialist.
I have a feeling we'll be veering off. Hopefully our listeners will bear with us as we veer off into some of these bigger meaning of life questions. Cause I think both of us think
Yeah,
on
actually,
both planes, both the technological, but what it means for life at large.
true, true. To our viewers, actually, please tell us if we are very verbose, or we need to cut down, or we need to talk less, or you guys are liking it or not. Please let us know. We'll really appreciate that. And our goal, again and again, is to give you the pointers and give you some commentary. Sometimes we're giving too much commentary here, but I think we can't hear nerdy, geeky people about. We care deeply about these topics. Maybe that's why. We'll give you pointers and links in the show notes, so you can click on those links and get more information and Google the right terms, and find out what's happening in the B2B tech world. I think with that said, I wanted to mention, like, very quick mentions for people to look, if they want to follow these things. India mandated licenses for laptops and tablets. That's one news was crossing the wire in last 10, 12 days. AWS is going to invest 7.2 billion in Israel. Google reshuffled their 7 years old called assistant unit. So it's like AI unit. So they reshuffled that. And by the way, Google's CFO got a new role. They're looking for a new CFO, I assume. And Matt Garman spoke to John Furrier. Matt Garman is AWS exec, and he said we are open to hosting models from OpenAI. So that was another interesting sort of statement or news. But we know that you know um, how close OpenAI is with Microsoft, and will they even take their models to Amazon? Will they host it there? I think they should, because having open in the company name doesn't make you open. And Sam Altman always brags about that. We are open, even though Microsoft has invested a lot of money, but they're not really
One of
open.
the least open companies.
Yeah, but we have open in the name. Yeah. Yeah, the funny joke actually, there was a Punjabi Indian skit. Like I tweeted that, a lot of people liked it. So I said they're MBA. There was a funny skit, a comedy skit on Indian TV. This one guy comes and say, "I'm MBA." Like he's not, like, you can tell like they were like a lunatics and walking around. "Oh, I'm MBA." So, "Well, you're MBA?" Like he dressed up like this. Say, I'm married but available. I said this OpenAI guys are married but available. So that's what they say. They're married with Microsoft and they're telling everybody, "Hey, we will."
Hmm.
It doesn't work like that. People know
I
that you're
like that
married.
analogy. That is how it feels. Pay no attention to the investor behind the curtain. It's really fun.
Yeah. You can't hide certain things. So yeah, I think that I have gone through all my notes, and uh, yes. Anything any last things you want to mention
Yep.
there?
I'm gonna blurt a couple. The Microsoft Active Directory hack, alluded to that quickly. CISA gave Microsoft sort of a public slow clap, what I would call a slow clap, because they've decided to open their cloud security logging for free starting in September. So that'll be interesting to continue to watch. I think that's a big deal. That's a sort of an admission, a tacit admission there that all things are not as they should be. The Tesla jailbreak hack with the professor and a couple students in Germany, who were able to exploit using voltage the circuit in the processor inside the media unit in Teslas, essentially to uh, hack the encryption the encryption key that would give access to paid features. So that one will be interesting to continue to follow. And then, of course, we were laughing about this one, that Zoom is calling remote workers back to the office.
Oh, Zoom. Yes.
Mhm.
That sounds like a funny headlines, but I think I don't blame Zoom. Zoom is just like
Yeah.
another company, so they're
Well,
great people.
yeah, like we were saying, all things in moderation. I mean, there's an extent to which you've got to maintain balance in an organization. It's one of those headlines that pops up every once in a while and you have to giggle just a little bit.
Yeah, the funny thing about Zoom, not funny thing, interesting thing about Zoom and my career, I brought Zoom to Oracle Cloud. They were about 10 people when we were desperately looking for more partners to join our Oracle Cloud Marketplace, right? And then I brought in about 60 partners to our exchange within like 4 months. I was in charge of that program to bring people in and onboard them onto our marketplace, and I Zoom was one of them. I met with them a few times, and they are one of the biggest customers Oracle Cloud has.
So
So
interesting.
Zoom is a good team. The founder came from Cisco. Um, yeah, I think they will do just fine. I think it's just unfortunate that some other companies that can give free, you know, uh, ways for people to meet, and it's hard to compete with free, and some other companies own the operating system, own
Hmm.
the cloud, own, like, and then this one company is trying to do a couple of things, and it's just hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And Yeah, they've got new features in beta. I think they're going to start targeting the consumer market a little more as my read with some of those features with, shorts that you can send out and disseminate either personally or professionally. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Yep. And another thing which I refined from what we usually most of the time say, cheaper, better, faster. Cheaper, better, faster. That's what technology is all about. But I have promised myself, I'll remind myself time and again that I need to add securer as well. Cheaper, better, faster, securer. Cheaper, better, faster, securer. So
Mhm.
I think we have to get there because security is paramount and going forward for us to survive in this digital world. And with that, thanks to all for listening. Thanks, Sarah, for joining me today again.
We'll talk to you all in 2 weeks.
Yep, 2 weeks.